Good morning, everybody. My name is Karen Taylor de Caballero, and today I'll be talking with you about Reader's Theater as a technique, an activity, and a project-based type learning module for the English as a Foreign Language classroom. So the outline for today's talk will follow the following points. We'll have a brief introduction to Reader's Theater and find out what it is. And then I'll walk you through some basic procedures for how to use Reader's Theater in the English as a Foreign Language classroom. The exciting part, I think, of this presentation will be looking at how we can exploit Reader's Theater, meaning how we can really use it to bring it to life in terms of vocabulary development and pronunciation in particular. We'll look at some special considerations. For example, what ages we can use Reader's Theater with, or if there are any level considerations. And we'll talk about how to evaluate learners' performance in Reader's Theater. What is it we're really watching for that indicates learning? And we'll have time for a summary to address any questions that have come up that we haven't already addressed. And I'll walk you through some useful online resources. So what is Reader's Theater? Well, Reader's Theater, also called it's called RT in writing. It's also called chamber theater. It's an oral presentation of drama, prose or poetry by 2 or more readers. Typically, it's 3, 4, 5, and up to 15 readers. You rarely find a presentation with with more than 15. The readers first read and familiarize themselves with the original text, and then they transform it into a living script that involves several characters. And those characters might be explicit characters in the story, or they might be implicit characters, meaning different voices that simply deliver a text that prior to the reading never had different voices. So I'll try to explain that a little bit later. The script is then prepared and performed for an intended audience, and this is a very important aspect of Reader's Theater. Reader's Theater is an authentic activity. And what do I mean by authentic? Authentic is that it exists in real life outside of the classroom as something that human beings do or enjoy doing. And so think to yourself, how often do we really have an authentic reason for reading aloud outside of the classroom? If you think about it, what we have are, for example, reading in one's church or mosque or other kind of a religious ceremony. That might involve reading something aloud, perhaps at a wedding, for example. Reading to our children would be an authentic read aloud activity. And I'll be sharing with you a story later today that I've read to my own children many times that I've used now for Reader's Theater. And so Reader's Theater is in the realm of a third area, which is theater and drama and acting and entertainment when we read aloud. In conventional theater, the actors read the scripts until they've memorized them. And herein lies a key difference with Reader's Theater, which is that the actors of Reader's Theater do not memorize their lines. And I'll say that repeatedly throughout today's presentation. Again, the actors do not memorize, so it's not a memorization activity. Rather, it's an activity that involves active reading, scanning while others are reading the text, and then reading aloud your own part. Its power lies in its repetitions. So the more times you read through the script together, the more you're able to use intonation, pausing, and other delivery features in speech that make it a powerful text. Another way to portray Reader's Theater is to talk about it as group storytelling. Again, sometimes the story in the script is already an explicit story. Other times it might be content, might be prose. For example, business school might use Reader's Theater with its students to deliver a chapter or part of a chapter on marketing. We've seen that done. So it's not always an explicit story, but it can be delivered as a story through the dynamic interaction of voices that are working together. Here, what you're seeing are different groups of people engaged in Reader's Theater, and you can see here that it's not just for young or adult. It's really been used across the age spectrum, and as we'll talk about today, you can use it throughout a variety of levels, even emerging readers and emerging literate adults. I'm going to return to the topic of authenticity. Who really does readers theater, and why? Um, Here in the United States and abroad in other countries, readers theater is widely known among its users, at least, as a social activity, not unlike singing in a community choir or playing on a community football team. Meaning people get together and instead of playing soccer or instead of, say, playing instruments together, they read a script together for enjoyment. The picture you see below is a team of readers theater actors called the chamber readers, and they're widely known, at least around here, for their readings. And I'm going to have Jennifer share Lightning Larry. This is a video clip.
We're the chamber readers. This is Eden, Sienna, David, and I'm Francine. This story is set in the Wild West. There's a band of thieves and rustlers and one good guy named Larry who rounds them all up by shooting straight from the heart. This is the legend of Lightning Larry by Shephard. Well, you've heard about gunfighting good guys like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp.
But we'll tell you a name that strikes even greater fear into the hearts of bad men everywhere. Lightning Larry.
We'll never forget the day Larry rode into our little town of Brimstone and walked into the Cottonmouth Saloon. He strode up to the bar, smiled straight at the bartender, and said,
"Lemonade, please."
Why, every head in the place turned to look.
Now, standing next to Larry at the bar was Crooked Kurt.
Kurt was a band of thieves and rustlers who'd been terrorizing our town, led by a ferocious outlaw named Evil Eye McNeil.
Kurt was wearing the usual outlaw scowl.
Larry turned to him and smiled.
My big frown you got there, mister.
"What's it to you?"
The rest of us got out of the way real fast.
The bartender ducked behind the bar.
Larry and Kurt moved about 10 paces from each other, hands at the ready.
Larry was still smiling.
Kurt moved first, but he only just cleared his gun from its holster before Larry aimed and fired.
Zing! There was no bang, no bullet, just a little bolt of light that hit Kurt right in the heart.
Kurt.
All right. So what you can see there are a number of things that identify readers' theater. You may have noticed, for example, that all of the readers are holding their scripts. After a while, you may not even notice that they're holding the scripts, but at first, those books really stand out. They're holding them and reading directly from them. It's clearly not the first time they've read through those scripts, but they continue to use them because they contain cues to how they want to deliver those lines. The next thing you may have noticed, and still looking at the picture, you can see it, is that the set or the area around those actors is minimal. There's not much of a set. There's no decoration. No, for example, no pretend trees or a house or anything that contextualizes the story. Rather, they rely on their voices to provide all of the context. Now, that said, they do use some amount of movement. They move around the stage, and that's something you can be doing in your classrooms when we talk about the classroom application. Also notice that they're not wearing costumes. So readers' theater, again, is diving into the script itself as the main source of enjoyment rather than costuming and staging and so forth. You may have also noticed that when they deliver the lines of their script, sometimes they deliver individual lines, and sometimes they are scripted to deliver choral lines or lines in chorus together. So those are some of the characteristics of the original authentic reader's theater. So if we take this as something that adults enjoy participating in, why should we take reader's theater to the ESL or EFL classroom? Well, I have a few reasons for that. First of all, reader's theater is a rich social activities that learners really do enjoy. Along these lines, I think of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory and just how often we as teachers in schools perhaps forget to really round out our instructional delivery to appeal to all of those different intelligences. So in this case, we're talking about interpersonal intelligence that we often think of as the time that we talk to each other or engage in group activities. But this is a little bit more structured as an interpersonal learning activity. Second of all, reader's theater offers built-in scaffolding. By that, I mean instructional scaffolding in the form of the scripts that the learners keep throughout the activity. So those scripts can then be marked up for pronunciation, for pausing, for intonation, and perhaps for staging, meaning where you move on the stage and so forth. Reader's theater inspires practice through meaningful repetition. So the act of rehearsing is a built-in repetition. Instead of having to repeat something over and over monotonously, you're really aiming toward a performance grade delivery of the script. And in the process of doing that, learners work on those lines multiple times, more times than they even realize, thereby gaining very valuable practice. Fourthly, reader's theater fosters development of a learner's external and internal reader's voice. What do I mean by a reader's voice? If you think back to the last time you read, whether it's in your first language or English, whatever language, chances are you have a voice in your head. It's your voice and it's silent, but you can really hear its characteristic, and it's not unlike your reading aloud voice. So that internal voice is an integral part of reading fluency, of being an effective reader for oneself. By learning to deliver the lines of a reader's theater script in an external manner by reading aloud, we can then transfer that read aloud voice, that voice that recognizes the rhythm of English, the pausing of English, how to create contrast in English, and so forth. That can be then transferred back into one's internal reading voice. And in this way, reader's theater strengthens both oral and reading fluency. I want to return to the topic of repetition and do something with you, which remotely will be kind of interesting. Since I can't hear you, I won't be hearing you, but I think this will work. So let's give this a try. I've got a quote here from Quintilian, philosopher from long ago, and I'd like you to read that phrase to yourself out loud, actually, right now at your computer. Please read that out loud now. Good. Now I want you to read it 3 more times. And I want you to note how your delivery changes each time you read it aloud. So 3 more times, read this very same phrase aloud. Good. Now what you may have noticed, and I'm guessing here, but I think I'm probably going to hit the head on the nail there, is that each time you've read it, first of all, it's been delivered a little bit more quickly, each of those 3 in the 4th time. Secondly, I think you're probably delivering more intonation and pausing and more expressive features than the very first time you read it aloud. So let's look at exactly what's happening when we become that slightly more fluent reader. when we read the phrase, one should aim not at being possible to understand, but at being impossible to misunderstand. Let's look at that. The first time you read it aloud, you may have read it fairly flatly, something along the lines of, one should aim not at being possible to understand, but at being impossible to misunderstand. But the second time, you may have already picked up on the meaning of this really wonderful quote. And so you may have already picked up on the not and the possible and the impossible. So it may have sounded something like, one should aim not at being possible to understand, but at being impossible to misunderstand. A subsequent reading of that would then perhaps have you focusing in on the contrast between understand and misunderstand. Notice that the word misunderstand in this sentence is doing something very interesting that you probably did possibly without even realizing it, which is that in isolation, this word misunderstand has a stress pattern that is unique. Well, misunderstand, with stand being the stress syllable. But in a phrase like this, reading it aloud for the delivery of an audience, suddenly you realize that it's contrasting with understand. And so you end up saying something like this. One should aim not at being possible to understand, but impossible to misunderstand. Okay. Finally, and I want you to look at this phrase one more time, try saying it aloud with each of the line breaks here and see how your delivery has changed since the beginning. I'll give you just a moment. And let's try that together one more time. Try reading right with me in chorus. One should aim not at being possible to understand, but at being impossible to misunderstand. And there we have a fully delivered phrase there. So to finish up with the topic of repetition, what we've just done is a slightly artificial version of what you really do get in Reader's Theater, which is that constant rehearsal, the revisiting of a line until it is delivered with its full potential right out there in front in the form of intonation, pausing, stress, and so forth. I'd like then to ask the question of what Reader's Theater can look like in an English as a foreign language setting, because what you saw with Lightning Larry and the chamber readers, was really a professional presentation of Reader's Theater. But it does look different on the English as a foreign language classroom level. What this picture shows here that you see here are some young learners from Taiwan, and they are reading as part of actually a Reader's Theater competition. That's the larger context. We'll go ahead and show the video, Mr. Stinky Tofu Man.
Good morning! The title of our Reader's Theater is The Stinky Tofu Man. The Stinky Tofu Man is adapted from The Stinky Cheese Man. Once upon a time, there was a little old lady and a little old man who lived together in a little old house. They were lonely, so lonely, said the little old man. Very lonely, said the little old woman. So the little old lady decided to make a man out of stinky tofu. I'll give me 2 watermelon seeds for ice and noodles for a mouse, said the little old lady, and she put him in the oven to cook. When she opened the oven to see if he was ready, the smell just about knocked her out. Ew! What is that terrible smell? She cried. The stinky tofu man jumped out of the oven and ran out of the door, calling, "Run, run, run, as fast as you can! You can't catch me! I am the stinky tofu man!" And
So that's a charming excerpt from The Stinky Tofu Man. which is an adaptation of the more well-known children's story, The Gingerbread Man. Um, I think what I want to point out first is just the commonality that this had with the first clip you saw, the professional Readers Theater group. Notice again the lack of costuming. They're on a stage, but there's no set, there's no background. And really what's brought to life is what's sitting in each of those children's hands. Their scripts are there in front of them, and they use their voices and their delivery to bring that story to life. Okay. Also, that they used some individual lines, and they also had some very engaging choral lines or lines together that they clearly enjoyed delivering too. Well, let's talk a little bit about the basic procedures of Readers Theater. In 3 very basic steps, you do need to find a text to work with, and I'll talk about a couple of different ways you can find those texts. Basically, you can either find a text that already exists that is simply prose, and then you can adapt it to Readers Theater, or you can find an existing Readers Theater script. And if this is going to be your first time using it, you may want to go with the second option of working with an existing script, and then as you feel more confident, you can work into other texts. The second basic procedure would be the most important and the most lengthy portion of it, which is the practice, explore, practice cycle. What that means is that you not just rehearse with your learners the script, but rather that you help them explore different aspects of language each time they revisit the script. So for example, over the course of 8 weeks, for example, you may revisit the same script time and again through those 8 weeks, but in small doses so that you can pull out one feature or another feature each time, which then minimizes that feeling again that they're just repeating, which they aren't. They're rehearsing with a different awareness, and that rehearsal is robust and enduring. The third part of Readers Theater is that you do need to provide an opportunity for learners to perform, even if it's just for one another in small groups, perhaps for another classroom, perhaps for the school that they're in, perhaps on a larger community-based level. But a fifth option would be to perform it for a videotaped performance that's then posted on something like YouTube or some other forum. If you go to YouTube, you will find many schools who have posted Readers Theater performances. So that performance can either be in front of a live audience or a digital performance for virtual audiences. So let's go back to that first step, which is that you're going to select a text. And here you really want to address your learners' interests. Know what age group that is and what interests them. If they're adults, that's a really wonderful opportunity for a discussion about what they most like to discuss, what they're interested in, what kind of humor they enjoy, those kinds of things. And if they're younger learners, you want to know, again, what kind of humor they are participating in that maybe you can address in the text. Typically, these are particularly fun when you have a bit of humor in the text for them to play with. Okay. As far as reading level goes, you want to look for a text that is just slightly more advanced than your student's reading level. Recall that they're going to spend a lot of time with this text, so they can actually handle a text that's a little bit above where they presently read. They'll be learning new vocabulary. They may be familiarizing themselves with a sentence structure that until this point hadn't been very comfortable for them. So look for that Krashen-esque I+1 idea, that idea of where you are plus a little bit further, so that your learners will stretch as they engage with this text. Okay, then you have the option that I mentioned a bit earlier here, which is that you can select an authentic text, meaning a text that exists outside of theater purposes or outside of teaching purposes, and divide it into a number of parts for which you have readers. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. The other option would be to choose a ready-made Reader's Theater script. And there are many websites that offer free, downloadable, ready-to-use Reader's Theater scripts. And those resources will be listed at the end of this webinar. Let me give you an example of how you can take an existing text, one that isn't made for Reader's Theater, but that you can easily adapt. This is a small storybook that is very popular among parents and children, at least around me, and it's called The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. This is a short book that tells a very engaging story about how a caterpillar wakes up out of his cocoon, starts to grow, eats a lot of food, and then gets a stomach ache, and then gets into his cocoon and comes out as a butterfly at the end. So there's a build-up, there's a climax, there's a conflict, and then there's a resolution with a kind of a beautiful coda where he comes out as a butterfly. So that's the basic story. I'm going to take just the first line of the book here that you're looking at, and it actually corresponds to the page that's shown in the image, and I'll read that to you. And if you'd like to read along with me, try doing that in chorus. It's a very satisfying experience, actually. In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up, and pop! Out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food. So that's the opening line of the book. And as you can see, the book is not terribly long. What we're going to do with that line is script it out for Reader's Theater. This would be a very simple way to do it. It's not even one sentence per reader necessarily. In this case, I've divided it up by phrase. And so what I'd like to do here so that you can experience this beyond the visual level is I'm going to be reader A, and you're going to be reader B. As you can see, reader A is indicated in one color. That's a color coding of a script that makes it more easy to read the script aloud. So you are the blue, the B part. And then when you see in orange the both, where it says both, we are both going to read together. Okay? When it comes to be your part, I'm going to whisper that part, and you're going to read it out loud. Here we go. In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up, and pop! Out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food. So that would be a very brief Reader's Theater version of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, at least the first couple of pages. Again, what I'm underlining here is the color coding of the script, and that you can adapt the script not just sentence by sentence, but even by phrase, so that we don't actually have different characters reading here. There aren't explicit characters in this story at this point. In fact, in this story, nobody actually talks. But the phrases are assigned to different readers, and that in itself brings the text to life in new and unexpected ways. Now, you can use Reader's Theater ready scripts, meaning scripts that are already prepared for Reader's Theater. And again, you'll have access to these websites, both through the webinar and on the discussion forum through Ning. But here's an example of one website that's put together by an elementary school classroom, and they have extensive resources, as you can see here. Under A, there are at least 7 or 8 different scripts right there alone. So pretty much hundreds, I would say over 100 scripts just available through this site alone. So that would be for younger readers already prepared. Aaron Shephard is a well-known Reader's Theater author who has also an extensive website. In fact, Lightning Larry, the text that you heard in the first video clip, was written by Aaron Shephard. And what I like about his website is that he provides some information about the genre, the culture, the theme, the readers, how many readers are needed, and the age group that it's made for, and finally the length, as you can see here in the circle, sort of the highlight circle I've made here. So we can see here that The magic of Mushkil Gusha, the tale of Iran, is a folk tale that it's Iranian, that the theme is thankfulness and sharing, that it is made for 10 readers, that those readers are intended, or that this story works well for readers ages 9 through 13, and that it lasts about 8 minutes. The one below it, Help Hillary Help, is about 3 minutes long. Okay, so if we haven't made it clear yet, you're starting to get an idea that Reader's Theater pieces are not extensively long, unlike, say, a Shakespearean play that would be hours long. Reader's Theater is something more along the line of minutes, anywhere from 2 to maybe 10 minutes. I wouldn't probably go much longer than that, especially when you consider groups presenting for each other. Just from a classroom setting, you wouldn't have time for longer pieces in any case. But a great deal of work can go into even an 8-minute piece, and that work can last over the course of a whole semester, possibly. I mentioned color coding your scripts. There are some websites that offer pre-coded scripts so that they're easier to scan. Here's where I'll dive back into the argument that Reader's Theater promotes reading fluency. One reason reading fluency is addressed in Reader's Theater is that when you have a part assigned to you, for example, say the pink part in this particular script that you're looking at, I know the script isn't very visible, but you can see the colors. And I kind of almost intend it that way, so that if you were assigned to the pink part, you could easily scan down and see when your part is coming. So this is a highly scaffolded version of the script when you have it color-coded in this fashion. You can see that coming up. But when you don't have it color-coded, the reading fluency comes in because you're scanning and reading along with each reader along the way. And in the act of doing this, of simply reading along with the other readers, your eyes are scanning those words over and over and gaining a familiarity with how those words are delivered together, phrases that fall out together, and how intonation, phrasing, and pausing come together to create an oral text from a written one. So in the act of scanning along as your friends read the script, you are actually developing a form of reading fluency that leads to faster reading. What I'd like to do now is move into the specifics of teaching Reader's Theater. And I think that the first day is particularly important as a setup for the entire activity so that learners know what they're doing and how to get started. The first thing you'll do is hand out character name tags or some other identifying accessory along with the scripts. That way, if you tell them, for example, that you're reader number 1, and these are younger children or younger learners, they can easily forget. I mean, even adults can forget for that matter. So if you hand out, say, a name tag that has a number 1 on it, they can always look down and check to make sure they know what their part is. The other option would be to have it already highlighted in their script, just that part. The next step would be to help learners identify their parts in the script. Don't give too long a time to do this. It's not intended that they read through all their parts prior to the read-through, but rather just that they know how to recognize their part. Meaning if their part is identified as reader number 1 and it's a bolded reader number 1, they can then scan down and find each time that occurs. Okay. You'll then read the script 2 times as a group and provide pronunciation of unfamiliar words only as it comes up. If somebody pauses and truly doesn't know how to say the word, that would be when you, the teacher, could provide that pronunciation. But otherwise, let the group work through the text themselves. Assuming that the text is not too difficult for them, they will be able to get through it, even if they're stumbling a bit. And the idea there is that they'll then appreciate the progress they make through repeated deliveries of the text. After at least 2 times, maybe 3, then you would have learners exchange scripts with someone else, so actually changing parts. so that they can see what it's like to be another part that they've already heard read. And you could try reading the script 2 more times, just giving learners the opportunity to enjoy reading a new part. They're still getting to know the story that is being told in the script. And it's just a time for them to see how that text shifts over, even just 4 or 5 readings in the same session, how much more fluent they already have become. And that's a really nice way to introduce the text. Beyond that first day, you're going to be looking for opportunities then to exploit the text. And by exploit in the field of language learning, I mean we're going to look for ways to enhance the learner's understanding of what the text is and how that plays out in spoken English as well as written English. So what you see here on this slide are references to day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. Now those days probably are not consecutive, meaning we're not talking about a single 6-day week of readers theater. Rather, you may want to sprinkle these through one of these days per week over the course of 6 or 7 weeks in a semester. Or you may want to revisit it a little more often. This would be your discretion, depending on the type of program you teach in and how often you see your students. But at this point, let me go through those different days. That, for example, the next thing you might do after initial read-through of a script is to spend a short lesson on the value and the impact of pausing and intonation on a script. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. The next time you come back at it, you may visit it from the perspective of expressive repetition. A lot of the texts that we like to read aloud contain a certain amount of repetition. It's what makes them engaging. So we'll pay attention to repetition in the text I'm about to go to. Day 4, for example, then you could dig into contrastive intonation. And these are all pronunciation-related concepts, but they're slightly distinct from each other. And they layer one upon the next to create a more and more fluent speaker. By day 5 or the 5th iteration, your learners are becoming more and more confident with the text, and this would be a good time to address the use of volume, meaning if they've been quiet readers up till now, this is a time for them to explore the range of their volume so that they can speak very loudly in certain parts that merit a loud voice. And then also use the contrasting quiet voice. You know, are there some lines that really would be more powerful if they were whispered or delivered in a low voice? So you can really look at that use of volume as an aspect of speech. And then toward the end, you can start putting the finishing touches with facial expressions and gesture. Some of those may already come naturally from the reader engaging with the text, but if you're preparing for performance, you can really start to develop those as cues that communicate the text to the audience. Let's take a look at what this may look like. Specifically, I'm going to look at day 2, day 3, day 4, the pausing, the expressive repetition, and the contrastive intonation. So pausing and intonation. This is additional text from The Very Hungry Caterpillar, the same text I read earlier. At this point, you can see on the left, the readers are assigned. There are, I think, reader 5, reader 4, reader 2, and then reader 3 comes in and reader 5 returns. Take a look at that text and let's see what happens to it over time. So on Monday, he ate through 1 apple, but he was still hungry. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry. On Wednesday, he ate through 3 plums, but he was still hungry. On Thursday, he ate through 4 strawberries, but he was still hungry. And on Friday, he ate through 5 oranges, but he was still hungry. Now, what I've done here is I've delivered that with a fairly neutral voice, not monotone, but fairly neutral, kind of like a first read-through. What we can then do with our learners is notice places where we can pause. And the first place you can talk about pausing is after a prepositional phrase. So you see here I've placed a pause mark after on Monday, so that the learner can say something like this. On Monday, he ate through one apple. So we would mark all of those instances on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday. Okay. Another good place to pause, in addition to after a prepositional phrase, would be at the end of a whole phrase, which would be where you might find a comma. Here in this case, here we have a period after apple. That would be a good place to have an extra pause. So I put 2 pause marks there. And then here after a comma, and elsewhere after a comma. Okay, so these are places to pause. And this is what you would do with your learners in class on a particular follow-up day after you've done a read-through of the story. They know the story. So we're really learning about where do we pause in English? After prepositions, after punctuation in the written word, and that punctuation corresponds almost always to the phrase structure, so a dependent clause or an independent clause. Okay, so that's pausing. And then you can start to layer in intonation. So we start to see on Monday, that's where I've marked it in green here. On Monday, we use our intonation there to show that we're going to continue talking, even though we're pausing. On Monday, he ate through one apple, but he was still hungry. So we can take all of those little introductory time phrases and mark those up for intonation. And that's a beautiful parallel in a story like this one that you'll find in many Reader's Theater scripts and many stories in general, that there's this parallel structure on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday, so forth. So part of what you want to do in teaching a Reader's Theater script is really appreciate that individual script for the features it contains. In the case of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, there's a great deal of parallel structure from one line to the next in the form of repetition. And it's not only in the days of the week. You may have already noticed there's a great deal more. But regarding intonation, let's now talk about the next kind of intonation, which would be falling intonation. We used a kind of a up, down, up intonation at the beginning for this little time clause. But at the end of the sentence, you have strong punctuation, you have a period, and we show that it's the end of the sentence by having a downward intonation. But he was still hungry, hungry, hungry. That is an intonation that falls down. Bop, bop. Okay? So we do a markup with our students and help them see that they're going to deliver that each time. Hungry. He was still hungry. Once you've addressed pausing and intonation to this extent, you can ask learners, do you see any other opportunities for intonation? And I'll ask you right now, if you look at this text, do you see another opportunity to mark intonation? My hint to you is here in the word apple. On Monday, he ate through one apple, but he was still hungry. Okay. So with apple, I've used a neutral kind of markup here. It's neither particularly rising or falling. It's not falling because the speaker is going to continue reading after the pause. And neither is it particularly rising because it's not a question and it's not the middle of a sentence. Okay. But by the time you move on to Tuesday, you might start to use some slightly rising intonation because the author has now placed these as complex sentences with a dependent and an independent clause. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry. On Wednesday, he ate through 3 plums, but he was still hungry, and so forth. So there's a bit of what a markup for pausing and intonation might look like. You'll want to get out colored pencils, you'll have copies of the text, and have learners work with you to mark up their text so that they can deliver that intonation and that pausing. Let's talk about expressive repetition then, because there's a great deal of it in this particular text and in many texts. Okay. You'll notice off the bat that one easy kind of beginning repetitive piece there is the day of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. One way you can deliver that would be by minimizing the word after it's been said. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But there are several bigger aspects of repetition here. So let's look at the word still hungry. This is a phrase at the end of every line, still hungry. It shows up here. And so the second time you read it, you can't read it exactly the same. Let's listen to how this sounds. On Monday, he ate through 1 apple, but he was still hungry. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry. So here I would encourage my readers to emphasize something different about it, just one of the words, still hungry. And that word still is the strongest word in the whole sentence. Let's find another way in the third iteration. On Wednesday, he ate through 3 plums, but he was still hungry. Notice that I'm drawing out the delivery there. It's slower with an even higher note on the word still. Then the next time we read that, the next reader might even get more enthusiastic and exaggerated with the word still. On Thursday, he ate through 4 strawberries, but he was still hungry. By the time we return to the 5th line, one option would be to simply return to sort of a more neutral reading because it returns to the beginning. So on Friday, he ate through 5 oranges, but he was still hungry. Okay, so that's a bit of repetitive expression there, or expression of repetition. And there's several other lines that I'm marking up here that you can see. And when I put a line through them, it's not to indicate that you don't say them, but rather that you use a lower voice. So on the last line there, I'll just read that line. On Friday, he ate through 5 oranges, but he was still hungry. So listen to the notes or the tone of the parts that are crossed out. On Friday, he ate through 5 oranges. He ate through is very, very low, and that's to de-emphasize it. Essentially, the reader or the listener has already heard that phrase, doesn't need to hear it explicitly again, and so we simply have it there as its function, but we don't need to hear it with a louder voice or a higher pitch. Okay. The other kind of intonation that I would pay attention to in a text like this, and again, we're looking at ways to exploit the text and to really deliver to the students a full understanding of what's happening in this text, would be contrastive intonation. We've already identified the repetition in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the second part of each of those words, but those are contrasting words. They're different days of the week. You may have also noticed that these sentences, which are very parallel, have a contrast between what the caterpillar is eating: the apple, pears, plums, strawberries, oranges. Okay, and then just before each of those words, you'll see the third kind of contrast, which would be the amount or the number of each of those that he ate. Let's see how we can mark that up. So here are all of the different things that he eats. So we can draw attention to that. And the way this sounds when we read it aloud as a delivery would be that on Monday he ate through 1 apple. On Tuesday he ate through 2 pears. On Wednesday he ate through 3 plums. So there's a louder voice, a higher intonation, and probably a greater pause afterward. That's possible. We can combine that with the contrast of the numbers there and with the contrast between the days of the week. This is what a fully marked up text might look like, where the learner has highlighted the important words. She has marked the intonation that she needs to deliver those phrases along with the pausing. Okay. And so each of those readers will now be able to read together to deliver a single text that behaves in a certain way. So what ages and levels can participate in Reader's Theater? Pretty much any age group can participate in Reader's Theater. It really depends on you, the teacher, to structure and scaffold it in a way that's appropriate to age and level. So I'm particularly talking about earlier young readers. They can do Reader's Theater, but you need to provide them with a text that they actually know pretty well already, not a new text. A new text is going to require a level of decoding and reading that they may not have. So young readers and emerging literacy readers at the adult level will need to have a story that they've heard read to them before. Okay. Illustrations can also support emergent readers. And then you may want to consider or reconsider the performance aspect of a reader's theater unit with young readers, which is not to put them in front of an audience necessarily, but possibly just to record them digitally. So you can have a digital performance. And here I'll have Jennifer play Caps for Sale. We'll just hear an excerpt to see what this looks like. This is done by a kindergarten class.
Caps for sale, 50 cents a cap. Ladies and gentlemen, caps for sale, a tale of a peddler, some monkeys, and their monkey business. Once there was a peddler who sold caps, but he was not like an ordinary peddler carrying his wares on his back. He carried them on top of his head. First he had on his own checked cap, then a bunch of gray caps, then a bunch of brown caps, then a bunch of blue caps, and on the very top a bunch of red caps. He walked up and down the street, holding himself very straight so as not to upset his caps. As he went along, he called, "Caps! Caps for sale! 50 cents a cap!" But one morning he could.
So that was an excerpt from Caps for Sale, which is a children's book. And you could hear the young readers reading expressively, and some sounded more like they were still in the earlier read aloud phase, looking at the words closely, and others had moved into a very expressive kind of reading, each learner on his or her own place in the path toward a greater reader fluency. So in this case, I think what's remarkable is that you don't really see a performance, but it is in fact a product, which is a form of performance that listeners can listen to what these young readers are doing with their voices. They appreciate the illustrations, and we really get to focus in on the achievement of these young readers. One of the final skills we talked about was adding gesture and facial expression. And I add this as a separate slide because I think it's important to acknowledge to each of ourselves that the extent to which you teach gesture and facial expression depends on your own comfort with these forms of expression. What I mean by that is that, for example, I enjoy using jazz chants, and I know there's been a webinar recently on jazz chants, and it's available on the State Department website through Carolyn Graham. Now, some people feel very comfortable teaching jazz chants, and others feel uncomfortable and have to really grow in that comfort. With acting, I would say that I'm comfortable with the use of my voice, but when I first started doing readers theater, I wasn't so comfortable with finding out how I wanted learners to use gesture beyond sort of everyday gesture and facial expression. So that use of exaggeration is something that you as a teacher may grow into. It may be a learning curve for you. But here you see this is a middle school class using, obviously, gesture. They're reading a poem in this case, and a poem is a really wonderful type of text to use for readers theater also. This particular poem I'm going to have you read with me is by Shel Silverstein, and I want you to see what the readers do with this after we've read it. And you can try choral reading if you want, or I'll just read it right now. So read along with me. "I cannot go to school today," said little Peggy Ann McKay. "I have the measles and the mumps, a gash, a rash, and purple bumps. My mouth is wet, my throat is dry, I'm going blind in my right eye. My tonsils are as big as rocks, I've counted 16 chicken pox, And there's one more, that's 17. And don't you think my face looks green? My leg is cut, my eyes are blue, it might be asthmatic flu. This is a much longer poem, but that's an expert. And so I'm going to have you, let's see here. We'll go ahead and listen to that same poem read by this team of middle school students, and I want you to pay attention to their use of gesture and staging. Here we go.
I, Shel Silverstein, found the book where the sidewalk ends. These are the readers. I'm reader 1, Amon. I'm reader 2, Sydney. I'm reader 3, Amina. I'm reader 4, Jake. I'm reader 5, Paul. Enjoy! I cannot go to school today, said little Peggy. And McKay. I have the measles. And Mom. A gash. And a rash. My mouth is wet. My throat is dry. I'm going blind in my right eye. My tonsils are as big as a rock. I've counted 16. Chicken pox. And there's one more. That's 17. And don't you think my face looks green? My leg is cut. My eyes are blue. It might be. It's the metal clue.
So I think what that delivery shows is there's so many things that are demonstrated there. Partly just look at the real sense of ownership that these learners have for the text. They clearly have decided on how to deliver this. They've divided the lines up. They've made decisions about exactly how they want to emphasize certain lines and what gestures they want to use. And these are middle school students who are capable of that. I love that they delivered the poem quite differently from the way I did, meaning there's not just one way to deliver text. In fact, by giving the same text to different groups, you can start to see how there are really endless possibilities to the way a text can come alive. And that's what we're trying to teach our learners about text, that it comes alive in your own reader's mind in multiple ways. Returning to the topic of Reader's Theater for live audiences, these are just some images I thought I'd share with you showing fairly young learners doing Reader's Theater as a performance, and notice how they have visual picture cues for their parts, and then those parts are probably also represented with the small fox up on the boy's script there, and the girl would have the duck and so forth. So there are ways to make the actual script reader-friendly for that age group. And then as a form of competition, I just have an image down here. This is from the Philippines with the 2010 Regional English Olympics, where Reader's Theater is one of the main competitions. So you can start to see that Reader's Theater can be used in a very small, humble level as just an adjunct to a lesson that stretches over a few lessons in a row, or it could be a large-scale project that a school participates in at the competition level. I raise competition because it's important to ask ourselves, how do we evaluate Reader's Theater skills? You know, how is it that we're going to let readers know, let our learners know, that they are achieving specific objectives? So that brings us to the question of, can we put together a checklist? This is one that I found for Reader's Theater online that I find useful at readerstheater.com. And if we read through these, you see, first of all, that it's very easy to use. It's a yes, sometimes, and no checklist column. And then you can assign points if you're going the route of, say, quantitative evaluation or even a contest of some kind. But I like those first three columns, the yes, sometimes, no. And then you could have notes on the right side if I were to make my own form from this. The skills are what I find particularly useful here. Notice what we're looking for in Reader's Theater, that each reader has some kind of a posture that's intentional, meaning they hold their body in a way that fits the text, that they use changes in volume that are appropriate, loud and soft, that they vary the pitch, high to low, in ways that express the text, that the reader uses effective pauses. So, for example, those places with the commas and the periods that we saw earlier with the little caterpillar. And that the reader uses appropriate tone of voice. So there may be certain moments where you need to use a very high-pitched voice, and other times when it needs to be very whispery. These would all be aspects of delivery. That the reader shows the personality of the characters through those kinds of things. That the reader speaks clearly enough for others to understand. That the reader makes facial expressions, uses hand and body gestures. This is, of course, if this is something you've taught, and makes some eye contact with the audience. Finally, it's that each reader is ready to speak when it's his or her turn, which returns us once again to the scanning involved, where their eyes are actually scanning the text in anticipation of their own line. That scanning, that movement of the eye over the text that precedes their line is a vital aspect of reader's theater that contributes to reading fluency. In summary, reader's theater it's a very rich skills integrative learning activity. It involves not just the reading, but the speaking, the listening, and in some developed cases of reader's theater, you can even have learners write their own scripts or make additions or changes to their existing script to further develop it. So it can even reach into writing. Secondly, reader's theater improves both oral and reading fluency, a topic I've touched on several times today, but that you'll see played out when you actually engage in it. Reader's theater is an authentic read-aloud activity, as we mentioned, along the lines of just the few others, which would be maybe speech reading, reading in a house of worship, maybe in a ceremony like a wedding ceremony, and reading aloud to our children. Those are 4 other authentic read-aloud activities, but here you have reader's theater. Fourthly, it's appropriate for all ages and levels, and of course that all depends on us, the teachers, to provide the appropriate amount of scaffolding and to choose texts that are appropriate for our learners, both in terms of the topic and the reading level. And finally, reader's theater can be adapted in all kinds of ways to fit your classroom setting. So it can be sort of a short-term activity, it could be a longer-term project, it could be very performance-oriented or less performance-oriented. A final thought I want to raise to everybody, and one that I've posted to Ning for the post-webinar discussion, is how RT, or how reader's theater, might be used for teacher professional development. So I'd like everyone to think about the potential that reader's theater holds for professional development among English as a foreign language teachers. What might English as a foreign language teachers gain from participating in reader's theater together? Imagine a room of teaching colleagues reading a script like one of those you've seen here. And take some time afterward to post your thoughts on this. It may seem a bit out of the box, but it's an idea I want you to entertain and that I'd love to hear your feedback on. Thank you very much. I'll see you online.